G'day, Tragic here, and this is another new series that I'm adding to my channel. Yes, I know there's a lot of stuff going on my channel, but well, just enjoy it while it lasts is all I can say. But the point is that I wanted to feature games that I can't play solo. Now, if I can ever convince some of my gaming partners to play some competitive games together on the channel, I will. But there are many games that are fantastic that a lot of people don't know about, especially in the competitive card game scene. People who are really into LCGs or Magic the Gathering, Vampire, the Decipher, Lord of the Rings, etc., etc. These kind of players, because those games are so intense and there's such a hardcore collecting aspect, they often don't know about other card games. So this section I'm going to call What Else Is There? And it's mainly focused at card game players, and just to show them other types of card games that are around that are a lot more fun and a lot more accessible. Well, not more fun, but they're a lot more accessible to non-collectible players, non-competitive players as well. This is the kind of game that if you like card games, you can bring out with your kids or bring out with non-gamer friends without them just going insane trying to figure out the rules of some of the more complicated games. Anyway, so we're going to start by looking at Seasons, a really fantastic game that came out just recently, I think last year, not quite sure, but still very available, and the expansion is coming out soon. So let's open the box and see what's inside. Well, firstly, of course, you have a nice gloss manual. If I can reach around the camera. Now, it's quite simple, because the game is quite simple, but it's nice and glossy. It's actually, I hear anyway, that this is a second generation translation, because it was translated and translated and translated into English from the translation, and there are some weird inconsistencies in the whole game just with the rules because of that. But at the same time, they're completely understandable, and it's a good little manual. Very nice art in it, as the whole game has. Then we have a number of these things. These are player boards, and I'll get into what these do in the next section. And at the moment, the game supports 4 players. Interestingly, these weird holes have no meaning, but in the expansion, a little thing goes in there. So that's a typical example of the new way games are sold. Started in the computer industry with DLC and stuff. They first wanted to go crazy, but now they're selling us incomplete games, and it's all about the DLC, because it was obviously designed with the expansion in mind, as you can tell. Next, we have this, which is a score track, and that's one of the really interesting things about this game that really elevates it to a more accessible level for non-competitive players. And that is that unlike LCGs or classic collectible card games or trading card games or whatever they're called nowadays, I call them deck construction games. But anyway, the point is, even though you're playing in competition with other people, you're actually playing against this point rack, which means that it's a lot easier to play with younger players and with, your wife or something, because you're not beating them down, you're racing basically. And races are just a little less confrontational. So there's that nice little track, let's stick that there. In addition, of course, we have quite a few chits of all manner of types. Now, I'll get into these in a sec. But basically, we have player... Yes, Euro games and their wooden blocks and them falling all over the floor to bounce off into who knows where. Whatever. Anyway, so you've got a bunch of player markers. These mark positions on the track and mark positions on your player board and all sorts of things. Then we have a series of seasonal coins or elements, but they're not really elements, they're parts of the season. Okay, and I'll go into these in more detail later. We also have this really nifty player board. Well, it's really a time track, I guess. And what this does, this tracks the year. So the game takes place over 3 years. So that's 1, 2, 3 in the middle there. You can see that. And then the game rotates around, so it comes out of there, goes into there, goes into there, into autumn, blah blah blah. And that is how the game is played as you go around this wheel. And I'll get to what all these things mean. Okay, so now we're going to get to the good stuff. Dice, and an awesome dice they are as well. Look at this stuff. Seasonal dice, one for each season. There's a bunch of dice, and they're huge. They're like Like, let me show you. This is a 16 millimeter dice. So I guess they're 32 millimeter. I haven't measured them, but they're ginormous and awesome. Now I'll get to what they're for later. And of course, the one we always care about, the real star of the show, is the cards. And the art on these cards are just, I mean, they are fantastic. Absolutely love the art of these cards. They're so beautiful. The cards are nice, thick stock, and yeah, just really great stuff. Okay, so that's the end of the component overview and a little introduction to the game. As with the LCG videos I do, the next video is going to be a rules primer, and then I'm going to follow it up with my final thoughts. So there you go, seasons. I'll see you soon. Okay, so this is what the game would look like for a 4-player game at the start of the game. Now we'll just quickly go through everything. We have the game board here, which is basically a time track. That's all this really is. We have the scoreboard up the top, which is a victory point counter. We have our dice, cards, and tokens where we can all reach them. And these are 4 spots. So let's just have a quick look at the timer. Now once you've finished being blown away by the art, you'll notice that there's 2 little black cubes, and these cubes indicate the track. Okay, so as the time moves throughout the seasons, the black cube moves around here. Once it gets past 12 into 1, the year has changed, and the cube moves along 1 more, and moves along 3, and when it can't move any further, as if you're going into year 4, that is the end of the game. You've got 3 years to basically set up your little magic workshop. Now each of these sections is a different season. Obviously we have winter, we have spring, we have summer, and we have autumn, and they're represented by these dice as well. So that's basically how the game functions on the time track. Okay, so that's the, the timer table thing. Let's get to some of the meat from this game. And one of the really cool things that attracts a lot of card game players, of course, besides the cards, is that this uses drafting mechanics. Now, if you don't know what a draft is, a draft was invented for Magic the Gathering, I believe. And in Magic the Gathering, you open a pack and it has a certain amount of cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I know there's more in a Magic pack, but there's 9 in this. So you have a pack of 9 cards that you open in Magic and you look at, and you choose one of them, and then you pass this pack off to your mate. And then he chooses one, passes around, he chooses one, passes around, he chooses one, passes around, until everyone gets a card. And this happens for every single player, so you all end up with 9 cards in your hand. Okay? Now what's interesting, if I just deal this out, so if I go 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 3. So what this means is, out of your original 9, you're guaranteed to get 1 back, okay? And more if you play with less players. But then this guy will draft his deck, draft his deck, until everybody has 9 cards. So we'll just deal them out. Okay, so that's the end of that. Now, if I've done this correctly, we all have 9 cards, which I have. Okay, great. So they've all got their starting 9 cards. Okay, and this is really important because, especially once you start realizing how the game is played and what the cards do, the opening strategy of your draft will count for the entire game. Now, drafting is tremendously fun. I absolutely love drafts, and the drafting is what originally made me want to buy this game. But it's unusual because you don't play with a full deck. So once you've decided on your cards and you picked your cards, you then look through it. So we look through this, right? And we pick 3 cards for each year. So 3, 3, 3, okay? And we come down. So this guy picks 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and he holds 3 in his hand. And he just puts these little tokens on to tell him that those are the other years, okay? And you have 3 cards in your hand with which to play with, and that's it. Okay, so the game board, once you're ready to start playing, is going to look something like this. You've all drafted your 9 cards, you've selected 3 for your current hand, and you've put 3 for year 2, and 3 for year 3. Now it's time to play. Now the rule says that the youngest player goes first, and that should give you an idea of how this game is targeted. So for argument's sake, I'm going to say this orange guy is the youngest player. First thing you do is you pick up the dice. Now you'll note that we have 5 dice. That's 1 more dice than players, and if we were playing a 3-player game, we'd have 4 dice, and if we were playing a 2-player game, we'd have 3 dice. Okay, so but we're playing a 4-player game, so we have all the dice. Awesome. Right, so a player now just rolls. Now I haven't got one set up here, but I strongly recommend a dice tray, because these are very heavy dice, which means they will slide and fly everywhere. And if they knock all your point scores down, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Okay, so this is what we rolled. This is a very good roll. Now, the way it works is each player, starting with the first player, now gets to draft the dice. So this player will pick up this one, say. The next player will grab this one, next player grab this one, next player grab this one, and it will leave 1 dice left over to activate the time trap. Okay, so let's have a look at these symbols. This one here is a card, right? And that means draw a card, but not from your reserve piles, from the actual deck itself. And there's a number of cards that draw from the deck. Now, you'll notice all these little pips at the base. Just ignore them for now. That's the little dots at the bottom. So what does this one mean? This one means you get a star, and I'll tell you what that means in a sec, and 2 water. The next one is 1 fire and a star. The next one is just 6 straight up victory points. And the next one is 2 victory points and 2 water. So whenever someone rolls, starting with the player who rolls, they get to choose a card. Now obviously the dice that I think I would choose would be this one. 2 victory points and 2 water. So that one's gone. Now everyone puts the dice in here, but that space is going to get used in the expansion. So he's got that dice. Now I'm doing this a little out of turn, but that means that he now generates 2 water energy, like that. He also generates 2 victory points. So we'll just give him 2 like that. And that's what his dice has done. The next player, he decides to take this one, which is also a very good dice. Now this one is a little different. It only gives 1 resource. So that goes in there, and he generates 1 fire, but he also has a star, right? And that moves this icon up. Okay, so that moves to 1 because he's now got 1 star. Now that means he can now have 1 card in play on the table. So this track on the card underneath where the things go tells you how many cards you can play. So if this cube was say at 9, that means he could play 9 cards on the table. But he's the only person with a star, so he's the only person who can play a card at the moment. Now the next player, he chooses this one. This is a very good one. There it goes. He gets 2 water, and it's also got a star, so it goes up 1. Now the last player has a choice. He can draw a new card, and you can only have 3 in your hand, so he'll have to discard 1, or take 6 victory points. And that's what he's going to do, take 6. So he just puts that there, and pulls his 6 victory points. So the grey block moves all the way up to 6. Now what happens? Now this is quite interesting. Now we find out what these pips are for. This one has 1 pip. Okay, which means that the time track moves. Let me pull this up here so you can see it. You see, this has 1 pip. Where was he? He was the car, wasn't he? So that means the time track moves by 1. This one, the time track would move by 2. This one by 3. 1. Okay, so the number of pips means the amount of time it moves through the season. So this moves 1, which means the time track has moved 1 point. And that's the end of the dice phase of the game. Now there's all sorts of cards that do all sorts of things like rolling new dice, re-roll, stealing dice from your partners, you know, changing your, you know, elemental resources, whatever you call them. And it's actually quite interesting and fairly deep. You might have remembered that this guy has a circle around it. Now this means that he can transmute. So if I just pull this up so you can look at it, each season coming down through here contains a transmute chart, right, for each element. So 1 water token will turn into 1 crystal, and the crystals are victory points, by the way. But earth elemental will become 2 victory points, and a spring elemental will become 3. And these sort of all change depending what season you're in. Okay, so that's a really good way to get credits when you need it. So how do you play cards? That's the real question, isn't it? Everyone's asking. So let's have a look at some. Okay, that's not a good example, not a good example. Here one. That's a complicated card. Let me find a simple card. Okay, here's a nice simple card. This card costs 1 water resource to play. Now to play it, you need to have a spare space based upon your star track. Now remember, the only person in our example who has a star track are these two guys. He's got 1 and she's got 1. But even though this guy's only got 1, this guy's got 1 star track, he can't play this card because he's got no water. Okay, he's only got 5, but this guy can. So he would play that out and just discard that. And that's pretty much it. And then the card itself will have abilities. This card, for example, says gain 2 energy tokens and 10 crystals. That's victory points. Increase your summoning gauge by 1. If the cursed treatise of Horus is sacrificed, discard all the energy tokens in your reserve. So this is a really cool card. So what it does, it gives you 2 energy tokens of any color, plus it gives you 10 victory points, and it increases your gauge. But if someone else destroys this card, there's a negative effect. So that goes out like that. And that's pretty much the whole game. There's only 2 more things I need to talk about. 1, observant people might have noticed that there is 2 coloured tabs here, even though everyone's got 1. So what that is for is just to track time. So say this is the score at some moment in the game. Click there's 100, and then when it gets to 200, you click there. So this yellow could be at 100, and these 2 are off the board. So what that actually means is that this guy is at 159, and this guy is 252, and this guy is 29, and this guy is 23. You also might have noticed these here, okay? Now, what these are special powers that you can do. Now, this is how they work. If you activate this power, or any of these powers, you have to move this track along. You've got 3 movements, and each of these minus symbols is how many victory points you lose at the end of the game. So if you go boom, that's -5. If you go boom, that's -12. Now you can use as many of these as you like, as many times, as long as in total you only use 3. Now this one lets you change any 2 crystals to any other 2 elements, into any other 2 elements. This one allows you to transmute even if your dice doesn't let you. This one just gives you an extra summoning card, so you can, this will pump this up so you can summon more creatures onto the table. And this one here says that if you draw a card die, instead of drawing 1 card, you draw 2 and then you discard 1. Very, very powerful. Underused because people don't like giving up those those points. So at the end of the game, what you do, you'll have X amount of cards out, other cards will be discarded, whatever, and you'll have whatever your score is on the track. Now, it's a race game. And what that means is that whoever's got the highest score wins, obviously. But not only do you score for this track, you also score from your table. Each card has prestige points up the top, which get added to your total. Now, I know people that when we play anyway, I actually add this to my scoreboard as I play. I just find it easier. But these cards are all worth something as long as they're on the table. Okay? So if this is on the table, that's 6 extra points. But at the same time, remember those 9 cards you drafted? If you end the game with any cards in your hand, they're minused. You get minus those points, so that's -6, okay? That's really big. There's all sorts of bounce effects in this game to keep filling up people's hands. Then, as I just said before, you also minus off anything that's here, okay? So that's -12, say. These aren't worth anything. So that is pretty much the mechanics of the game. You do a draft and then you roll these awesome dice. You then draft the dice. They determine your actions. You play cards. The cards all have lots of effects. Now, the deck is quite large, so there's lots of replay value here. You'll be playing this quite a lot before you start seeing the same hands kind of thing. And it's the cards are actually extremely good. Now, anyone who follows my channel knows I play a lot of card games, and the cards themselves have the same kind of interactions as depth as you normally see in a deck construction game. You can get some very clever combos going, all sorts of things going on. But what is really interesting is that this game is a racing game, not a direct conflict. So while there are cards that let you screw with the other players, you're really not in direct conflict, which is a huge difference, especially when playing with children or my wife. So It makes a huge difference. Okay, so that's pretty much the basic rules of the game. You just go around clockwise and the turn alternates. So whoever was first on this turn is now last on this turn. And then, so the first player always changes. So each person gets a chance to pick the dice first. Okay, so I'll get to my final thoughts in a sec. So obviously I'm quite taken with this game. I really enjoy it. This is what seems a very simple game. Like you do your draft and then one person picks a dice, you all pick a dice, you go in turn, play cards. The card mechanics on them, the actual cards themselves, aren't as complicated as you'd see, like the rules aren't as complicated. But the cards themselves can really combine into quite a lot of interesting combos, and it's very deep. And people who really like card games, I think will like this game because it's sort of like the best of both worlds. It's a simple game that you can play with your friends, and yet there's enough interesting things going on with the card interactions that you can get some quite powerful and fun events going on. Now obviously, because it's a drafting game, the more you play, the better you get, and that's going to be a real problem in the future. Like if you play a beginner, you're obviously just going to draft the best cards and you're going to smash them. So that's a real downside to the game. Now people recognize this, and there is some talk about various variants that actually have deck building inside it, or variants where the experienced player has a random hand while everyone else drafts, things like that. So the cards that he drafts are actually discarded, so he drafts only the worst cards and then he discards them and then draws a new random set of cards. Anyway, the point is, because it's a drafting game, the better you are at it, the more experience you have with the cards, the much more powerful your decks will be. And that is also one of the great things about it, because this is a card game that's, when you first start playing, it's very simple. But as you start to learn it, and as you start to get used to the cards, your decks that you draft become more and more powerful. The combos just get better and better, and you feel like you're making this great progress, which is really fun. The art itself is just gorgeous. I can't get enough of the art. My only thing I don't like about the cards is that they have black borders. Now anybody who's played any games that have black borders realize that black frays, when it gets damaged, because it's an ink print, the white under the board, or often the grey under the board, will be very visible on the black, which means that when they get slightly damaged, black border cards become very noticeably damaged, much more so than white border cards or light coloured cards. So I would think that this is a game that needs to be sleeved. I haven't personally sleeved my game, but it really does need sleeving. What's interesting though is that it doesn't have intense shuffling. There's only a single large deck, and I do a pickup shuffle on it, so to preserve the card edges. So they don't take as much of a beating. I mean, your hands are only 3 cards in a hand. They're very easy to hold. But that is a downside. But apart from that, the art and the production on everything is just off the chain awesome. The dice is just, I love those dice. They're so big and huge. And, you know, the chits, everything's great. Now, in the tutorial that I gave, it doesn't really show you the game flow. So the game does take a little bit getting used to. I mean, only having 3 cards is so odd. And it feels like the drafting portion of the game is almost superfluous, which it's not. Like I said, the more you get into it, you'll actually discover that this game has tribes in it, it has factions, and you'll start to realize that if you draft certain combos, you know, they're actually themed inside the main deck, and you've got to discover these themes for yourself. It's really awesome. So when I say the drafting is superfluous, that's not really the right word. What I'm trying to say is that it's simplified. You see, in Magic the Gathering, and I'm using that as an example because that has fantastic drafting mechanics. And in that game, because of the color system between the different types of card groups, there are situations where even if a card is very powerful, the person to your right or left will not take it. So when the drafting table reverses, you can kind of tell what cards he wants, right? And you pass signals as to what kind of color cards you would like. And then, you know, they go, okay, well, he wants red, so I'm not going to draft red, and then he'll get the red because he's going to not draft green, and, you know, you get a better deck. Anyway, that kind of control and that kind of strategy is not in this draft. This draft is
as every single card can be played by every person and there's no restrictions except for what resources you generate, and you can generate all of them, it's basically whatever's the best card you take, and it's that simple. And it's very simplified, and I mean that's in keeping with the entire design of the game. The whole point of the game is to have a simplified card game experience. But still, for me, I was hoping for a much deeper drafting mechanic, and that the drafting is really the dice. Every single turn you draft the dice, and you draft 9 cards at the start out of 4 packs. So the drafting feels a little added. Still, that and the black cards are my only real negative points in this game. I don't want to be down on it too much in that whole bit about the drafting, because the drafting portion is still great and still very powerful. You get a lot of that drafting mechanic that makes drafting so much fun inside it. It's just simplified a little bit. And the drafting of the dice, again, gives you a lot of choice. You know, it's just a really fun day. And I've never had anyone not like this game. Everyone who's played this game has just loved it. And I'm talking hardcore card game players. I'm talking board game players. I'm talking people who aren't gamers at all like it. You know, it's got dice rolling, pretty pictures, it's got some powerful card effects, it's got this randomness to it like card games have. Yeah, all in all, this is a really, really great game. It's a great mid-level entry game for people interested in card games. It appeals to the veterans, and it appeals to new players. I mean, it's quite an achievement, I think. Anyway, so what else is there? Well, there's seasons. Catch you next time.